Welcome back, everyone. We'll be going over UFC Fight Night, Santos versus Walker in this episode. This actually looks like a pretty exciting card overall on paper here. I think there's a lot of potential for finishes for this card, but I just wanted to quickly dive into the recap for the previous event while it's still fresh in my mind. It's like 2 a.m. right now, just got home, and still buzzing from those fights. Man, that was a fantastic card. Definitely gonna have some recency bias here, but I felt that was one of the more exciting, memorable cards of the year so far. But let's get right into it. So kicking off the card, Jonathan Pierce, Omar Morales. Kind of dropped the ball there on this one. Thought Morales would have a little more success defending the takedowns. But Pierce, man, the guy is got a motor on him, just does not stop coming forward, and was eventually able to break Morales. So pretty bad read there. Moving along, Semmelsberger, Martin Sano. And just a complete mismatch. Complete skill difference and athletic difference. Ended up putting Semmelsberger in parlay and ended up taking Semmelsberger by knockout as well and cashed that in about 15 seconds. Semmelsberger made it look easy. Sano does not belong in there. He doesn't belong in the UFC. He probably doesn't even belong in a regional promotion, honestly. Cody Brundage, Nick Maximov didn't really have any action on this fight. I know a lot of people were on Brundage looking to fade Maximov, but didn't really see it there. Brundage coming in short notice, being the smaller guy, and Nick Maximov actually having decent grappling made it a pretty tough matchup for Brundage. And at plus 120, which is I think where he closed around, not a great line, not a ton of value there. But moving along, Uros Medic, Jalen Turner did take the under in this fight. Both guys, extremely high potential to finish, and both guys do like to move forward. Medic, I don't think he's had a fight go past like 6 minutes, so pretty easy cash there. Moving right along, Roxanne Modafferi, Tyler Santos. So I had Santos in a parlay, and she straight up just bullied Modafferi in there. Like the athletic and age difference was just way too big. And Santos actually showed, I think, pretty good game planning and fight IQ in there. Basically initiated the grappling so that Modafferi couldn't get her grappling going. Like seeing Santos just struggle against the grappling and cage pushing of Mara Barella a few fights ago, I think made the team realize, the best defense is just offense. They were basically just like, you're not going to grapple fuck me because I'll be grapple fucking you. That's some pretty big brain stuff there. And Santos, being the stronger, more athletic fighter, was able to abuse that pretty well. And she kind of did the same thing against Robertson as well. So yeah, cashed that leg of the parlay pretty easily. But moving along, Shamil Abdurakhimov, Chris Daukaus. So yeah, I kind of regret not putting a bet on this. I know I had bet on it a while ago when they were first booked to fight, but it falling apart and it getting rebooked as much as it did made me a little hesitant. I don't know why, but I also had a lot of exposure on this card, so I ended up not really playing this fight. And in hindsight, I obviously should have kind of played out the way I expected it to. Daukaus just being the much younger, quicker guy in there, much faster hands against an older Abdurakhimov coming off a long layoff with all the health stuff going on. It should have been a smash spot, honestly, but I ended up not betting that fight. But whatever, moving along. Dan Hooker, Nasrat Hakparas. So, great buy low spot on Hooker here, showing why he deserves to be ranked. And, kudos to anyone who actually sacked up and bet on Hooker this fight. But all the travel concerns and stuff had me a little hesitant. But I did say that if both guys came in decent condition, it'd be Dan Hooker all day. And yeah, Hooker was able to get the better of Hakparas in most of the exchanges, in the striking and the grappling as well. Just showed that there was indeed levels. So yeah, good on anyone who bet Hooker there, because he definitely looked like a much bigger favorite in there. But moving along, Marlon Moraes versus Merab Dvalishvili. Oh my God, this fight. What a legendary chin on Merab. That's potential comeback of the year material. I mean, Merab was doing the little wobbly squat, and I thought Marlon had him there. But Merab, he had the wherewithal to shell up, to make some distance between them and actually turn the tides a little bit near the end of that round. And I knew the fight was over when Merab was able to get a takedown after he'd been hurt so badly. And I can't even say I was too surprised with the outcome, because we've kind of seen this story before, but seeing it unfold in real time was nuts. Anyways, I had initially placed a quarter of a unit on Marlon to win in the first round, and that was plus 900, which is ridiculous. I had expected it to be about like plus 400, maybe plus 500 tops, but the fact that it was plus 900 let me hedge out of that pretty easily. So I ended up sticking Marlon in a parlay with Semmelsberger, who was essentially a lock, so just got some really nice odds there. Cashed on that pretty easily. And had Marlon actually have gotten that knockout early, I wouldn't have lost much money because that plus 900 number on that first round finish was absolutely bonkers. So yeah, fucking crazy fight, but we'll move on. So heading into the main card, Jessica Andrade, Cynthia Calvillo. Andrade rounding out the other part of my parlay there, and I did actually put a little bit on Andrade by decision here. Kind of overthought that one a little too much. I thought that Andrade, she'd clearly have the striking advantage, and I thought that Calvillo might attack the grappling a little bit. Thought that Andrade might go to the grappling a little bit as well. And if that happened, we might see the fight stall out a little bit and go to a decision. And historically, Calvillo's been pretty tough in there, but apparently not, because Calvillo pretty much just shelled up as soon as Andrade started to unload on her. So yeah, that was a pretty stupid play. The athletic and physical difference between the two is just way too big. Completely underestimated it. And, once again, this fight just goes to show you how weak the whole division really is, because Shevchenko basically dominated Andrade, and Andrade likely murders anyone else in the division. Like, the fact that there's such a big gap between 1 and 2 in the rest of the division is kind of bleak for the division right now. Hopefully we get some new blood in there soon, but as of right now, it's not looking great. But yeah, moving along, Curtis Blades, Jairzinho Rosenstrike also had a unit on this fight to not go the distance. And of course, my initial read on it was that either Rosenstrike is going to catch Blades coming in, just knock him out, or Blades is going to get Rosenstrike to the ground and basically just murder him there. Thank God I didn't go too hard on that bet there, because I did feel that there would be a chance that it'd be a pretty low-paced fight and that Blades would maybe prioritize control over doing too much damage. However, I think one thing became very apparent in this fight, and I am aware that Rosenstrike has historically been a very low-volume sort of fighter, but this fight really hammered home that Rosenstrike is a fighter that will make the business decision in there. And what I mean by that, for those of you unaware, it's a term commonly used in the NFL. Players, they'll either run out of bounds or dive to the ground and not take the hit, basically to look after their health and not take any damage at the expense of maybe not getting as much yardage. And that's kind of what happened here in this fight with Rosenstrike. He didn't really show any urgency to get up when he was taken down. He was more concerned with kind of just mitigating damage on the ground. He was fighting hands the whole time with Blades. And in doing so, he wasn't able to posture up or frame out or anything. Basically just keep Blades in half or full guard and just mitigate the damage coming from him. But, in doing so, he wasn't going to win the fight at all. He was just trying to stop as much damage from occurring as possible. So yeah, I think for me after this, it's become much more apparent that Rosenstrike values taking less damage over winning potentially. And honestly, I can't hate him too much for that. It leads to him having some boring ass fights, but at the end of the day, he's just trying to preserve his health and his longevity in the sport. But I guess it's just a little tidbit of information. Maybe it'll come in handy in the future, but yeah, I think I might be done betting on Rosenstrike. It's just the guy, he's either going to knock you out or he's going to be in some of the most boring fights ever. But moving along, Nate Diaz, Robbie Lawler. Didn't really have any action on this fight, but man, the lead up to this fight was honestly kind of sad. Like the interviews for Nick and him doing his little shadow boxing routine, the guy just looked completely out of it. Kind of seemed like he might have been coming back for the money. And it looked like the public kind of had that sentiment as well. Looked like Robbie's line got steamed quite a bit. I think he was like a minus 150, minus 160 favorite going into that fight. And it just didn't look like Nick had much to offer there. It did end up being a little better than I had expected, but it was still kind of sad. Like, Nick actually went and threw volume, but it didn't look like many of his shots were hurting Robbie, and I felt like Robbie was kind of putting it on Nick a little bit. And the way it ended was honestly kind of whack also, but I'm just hoping Nick got paid in there. But yeah, moving along, Shevchenko, Murphy, again, a fight I didn't have any action on. Honestly, not much to say here. Valentina just completely ran through Murphy. Murphy had absolutely nothing to offer on the feet. I think she landed like 10 strikes maybe. None of them really significant. And Shevchenko basically just dominated. And nobody was surprised at all. So moving along, Alexander Volkanovski, Brian Ortega. And damn, that was a good fight. And I guess in hindsight, it probably wasn't all that close of a fight, but there were some pretty hairy moments there for Volkanovski. I'm mainly talking about that third round when Ortega had Volk in two pretty nasty spots. He had him locked up in two submissions there, and man, I thought I thought Volkanovski was done in there. Like, both of those subs looked like they were locked in pretty tight. Volkanovski, I mean, his head was all purple. You saw the veins popping out of his head, but somehow he survived, and somehow he was able to turn the tables on Ortega there. I mean, just the cardio and the conditioning and the heart of Volkanovski is just, that was phenomenal. What a crazy performance by Volk there. I really hope he gets the respect that he deserves after that performance. But yeah, I did have 1.5 units on Volkanovski there. In hindsight, I guess I could have gone a little harder like I initially wanted to, but you know, that was a really, really hairy situation that Volkanovski was in. I mean, if that exchange had happened earlier in the fight, there might have been a much higher chance that Ortega finishes that submission, probably even sleeps Volk there. So I can't be too upset about not putting some more units there. That was a pretty crazy exchange. And yeah, I think on another night, we see Ortega finish him. And I did actually put 0.1 unit on Volk to get the finish in either the 4th or the 5th round. And the reason I did that was I feel that even after Ortega's, really solid performance against Zombie, I think that Ortega is still very hittable. His offensive striking is still pretty good, but, defensively, still a lot of holes. And Volkanovski is one of these guys who will pick it up as the fight progresses. And, if Ortega slows down at all, I saw that Volkanovski would have a lot of opportunities to maybe start putting it on Ortega. And even though Volkanovski is a decisionator, he is someone who can do a lot of attritional damage. And I thought that could potentially happen here. And, it came really damn close. And, there were some moments in that 4th round you could say that it could have potentially gotten stopped. I mean, Volkanovski was landing some nasty ground and pound there in that 4th round. Like, Volk was landing some pretty heavy unanswered shots. And, I just got to say, Herb Dean is an absolute trash ref. And I'm not just saying that because he didn't give me the stoppage in that 4th round there. Because I get it. Even though Ortega was taking a bit of damage there, some other refs probably would have let that go on. And, seeing it as it was a championship fight, that's an understandable sentiment to let him maybe tough it out and possibly get the comeback because, Ortega has shown that, he can put together a pretty crazy comeback. But it's really the inconsistencies that's really annoying. Like, I get letting Ortega be a warrior here in this spot, but then in other spots, he'll call off a fight way too early, or in some other fights, he'll basically let a fighter get knocked out twice before he calls it off. And not to mention, he completely goofed it after that 3rd round. I don't see it being talked about too much, but yeah, between that, I think 3rd and 4th round when Ortega was basically dead, right? The guy was laying on the canvas for, I think, a good 10, 15 seconds after the round had ended. They had gone in to do tests and stuff on Ortega, and Herb Dean basically just gives Ortega an extra minute and a half to recover there, doing his little, finger test or whatever. And the crazy thing is I don't even think Ortega passed that test. Like, Ortega just seemed completely out of it. So what the fuck was that even for? But yeah, man, Herb Dean just fucking sucks at his job. Anyways, rant over. Let's just get right into this card. Okay, in the first fight of the night, or at least what I think is the first fight, is Alexander Hernandez taking on a short notice replacement, Mike Breeden. And no odds on this fight just yet, but Hernandez will likely be a big favorite here. Breeden is clearly not UFC caliber, but we'll start with Hernandez first. So, he is primarily a striker, generally likes to move forward, pressure his opponents, does seem to have a bit of power, but, honestly, outside of the Dariush knockout, has looked pretty unimpressive, if I'm being honest. Because, look, he knocks out Dariush in his debut, which, if I'm being honest, is a little fluky. So, Not going to put too much stock in that knockout, and then gets a win over OAM, which, solid win at the time. OAM, pretty legit grappler, and Hernandez was able to kind of flip the script a little bit on him by hitting some takedowns of his own. So not going to take that away from him. That was a pretty good performance, but outside of that, hasn't really looked all that good. Had a very uneventful fight against Ronaldo, and then beat up a pretty washed Gritzmacher. And then obviously he does have some pretty nasty knockout losses to Donald Cerrone and Drew Dober, who are, veterans of the sport at that point, and, not terrible losses, but, he was finished pretty brutally in those fights. And then, of course, he does drop a decision to Thiago Moises, which definitely shocked a lot of people. Moises not really a boxer, someone who is more of a grappler, and Moises was able to pretty comfortably, outbox Hernandez in that fight. So yeah, in my opinion, I feel that Hernandez is someone who is a bit reliant on his athleticism to get by, and he's definitely going to have to shore up his game. He's going to have to work on his technique. He's going to have to work on his striking a lot more before he's able to take that step up. But, fortunately for him, he's getting another short notice replacement. He's getting another fucking layup in Mike Breeden, which, if I'm being honest, I didn't do like a crazy deep dive on this guy, but from what I have seen, Breeden is just a very mediocre fighter. Striking is extremely basic. Grappling is pretty garbage as well. I mean, Breeden almost got armbarred by a 39-year-old 12-8 fighter. So, just a terrible look. And then, he didn't even put on a great performance against that 39-year-old either. So, yeah, the guy just does not look good. On the feet, I did see him struggle a bit with the kicks of Romero, which is definitely going to be big here for Hernandez. Hernandez is someone who will look to throw leg kicks, but, overall, I just think that this is a pretty easy fight for Hernandez, honestly. I mean, say what you will about Hernandez, but I do think that he is at least UFC caliber, whereas with Breeden, I don't think the guy deserves to be in the UFC. I don't even think he's a good regional fighter. So yeah, I think for Hernandez, even though I don't think he's a particularly great fighter, will be the better fighter for sure in this matchup. I think he's the better athlete for sure, and he's definitely fought the better level of competition also. So yeah, this should be another layup fight for Hernandez here. Honestly, I don't mind it too much. Let this guy get his knockout so can raise the stock a little bit so we can fade him next time. But yeah, I think Hernandez just walks through Breeden here. I think he gets it done by knockout, likely in the first round. And if I had to line the fight here, I'd say Hernandez probably like minus 300 at least. I don't see him being any less of a favorite here. He's probably going to get steamed, honestly. People are going to throw him in his parlays, and I see him being like a minus 600 or so by the time fight day rolls around. So yeah, I think Hernandez, relatively safe pick here. Might stick him in parlays up to like minus 500 or so. So yeah, I think Hernandez is obviously going to be the side. I think he's a relatively safe bet. Okay, moving along, we have Shanna Young versus Stephanie Egger. So, yeah, this is a very, very low-level fight. Not one I have much interest in, honestly. Young's going to be the minus 132 favorite. Comeback on Egger is plus 112. So I guess we'll start with Egger first. So, Egger is primarily a grappler, I suppose. Honestly, nothing too special on the feet. Honestly, keeps it pretty basic. Does have a decent 1-2, but outside of that, really not much else. Does look like she telegraphs a good amount of her shots, and it does appear that Egger's got a judo background, but I don't think her grappling is particularly great. She does have a nice throw that she likes to go to, but yeah, she's honestly just kind of sloppy on the ground as well. And yeah, she will look to take the back, but again, she's put herself in some pretty compromising situations, and she did get dominated by Tracy Cortez in her last fight. Cortez is a pretty solid wrestler, but just not a great look on Egger's end. And, outside of that, she hasn't really beaten anyone of note. And, she is 5-2. So, very, very low level stuff here we're dealing with. Shanna Young, similar situation, honestly. Primarily a grappler, pretty sloppy on the feet. Does have an okay kicking game, but, nothing to write home about, honestly. Does have a wrestling base also, but, her grappling is also pretty bad. She'll usually look to clinch, look to wall install, and kind of just grind opponents out that way. I suppose she's got a little more grappling to speak of than Egger, but, again, not very high on Young. I will say, though, Young has probably fought the higher level of competition, and I guess is a little more accredited with her jiu-jitsu. I'm going to sound like a broken record here, but overall, this is a pretty low-level fight. Not one I honestly did too much research on. Not one I have any sort of interest in whatsoever. If I had to pick a side, I am going to go with Young here, but I wouldn't be surprised if Egger was able to take her down and get a little bit of control time. But yeah, this is probably going to be a pretty sloppy fight. It's probably going to be a pretty sloppy fight on the feet, and it could be pretty back and forth on the ground, maybe some, weird scrambling situation. So I really wouldn't bet this fight at all. Anything can really happen this fight. We could see some really just weird grappling exchanges. We don't know how the refs are or how the judges are going to score this. And, I guess if anyone's got some submission upside, it might be Young. But, outside of that, I really don't have a great read on this fight. So, give me Young here, and I guess I'll take her to win by a pretty close decision here. All right, moving along, we have Antonina Shevchenko versus Casey O'Neill. And O'Neill's the minus 200 favorite. Comeback on Shevchenko is plus 170. And, it's kind of interesting that Shevchenko or Antonina is not fighting on the same card as her sister Valentina, even though they're only fighting a week apart. Maybe it's because Valentina doesn't want Antonina to soil the family name on a numbered card. I'm just kidding. I think realistically, Valentina probably just wants to focus on cornering Antonina. Not that I think it'll be of much help, because Valentina going A in the background will probably not fix the defensive grappling of Antonina, but the secret is clearly out on Antonina at this point. While her striking is decent, her takedown defense is horrible, and Antonina is an absolute scrub off her back. Because whereas Valentina is a complete human being, Antonina is a complete fish out of water on the ground. And it appears the bookies are wise to it now, because the line is about right. It's how the fight should have been lined against Lee, and now Antonina's just been completely exposed on the ground here. And she'll be going up against a grappler in O'Neill, and O'Neill definitely is still a bit green there. She's only 22, but she is very reliant to go to her grappling. Obviously, I do feel she is a bit wild there, still a little unpolished, but, I do like what I've seen from her so far. She's, again, very reliable to go there, but, she can get a little overzealous there, lose position sometimes, but she is pretty aggressive there, is pretty reliable to land the ground and pound, can be pretty vicious there, honestly, and will look to attack submissions as well. She has beaten relatively unknown fighters for the most part. Her best win is probably against her most recent opponent in Laura Procopio, so that was kind of impressive, but Procopio is someone who's still somewhat unproven also, and Procopio has been cut, actually. Don't agree with it, but Procopio is still a pretty green fighter herself, although I do think it's a decent win for O'Neill. She showed pretty good grappling there. So yeah, I feel in general this is a pretty good matchup for O'Neill here. She'll have a very clear path to victory in the grappling. I think that if the fight does get to the ground, O'Neill is potentially live for the finish. Shevchenko just has no idea what to do there. I think that O'Neill could potentially get the ground and pound finish. Could potentially find the sub as well. So I'm liking the inside the distance prop here for O'Neill. There is a tiny bit of hesitancy here. O'Neill being extremely green, I think might be a little bit of a factor here. And the fact that O'Neill doesn't have particularly great stand-up, could be a little rough for her on the feet if she isn't able to get the takedowns. But I do think that she will. Shevchenko's got terrible takedown defense. So when that happens, I do expect O'Neill to potentially find the finish here. The line isn't great. I don't think there's like crazy value on it or anything. Now that people are aware that Shevchenko has got pretty terrible defensive grappling, we see a lot of the value getting, sapped out on the line here. I don't know, though. I might just still bite the bullet and either end up playing O'Neill straight here, maybe even throwing in some parlays depending on how the rest of the card looks. But we'll have to see. I'm definitely looking at the O'Neill inside the distance prop, though, when it does come out. But I might just have to sack up and take O'Neill here. I really do think she's got a pretty favorable matchup. Shevchenko, also a little bit older as well. At 36, Going on 37 in a couple months, I just don't think that Antonina is going to be making crazy improvements or anything. So yeah, the pick here is obviously going to be O'Neal. I think she gets it done. Round 2 submission. And in the next fight, we have Niko Price versus Alex Oliveira. And Price is the minus 130 favorite. Comeback on Oliveira is plus 110. And I guess we'll start with Price this time. He is primarily a striker. The guy is all action in there. Loves to move forward. Willing to exchange in the pocket. But he is pretty hittable. Extremely hittable, actually. But, he will bring the fight to his opponents. Makes him really fun to watch. But also means he takes a ton of damage. And for someone as long and lanky as he is, he actually doesn't use his length all that well. He's more than happy to get into a dogfight. Just push the pace, get in his opponent's face, and look to just break them. However, I feel that his durability is starting to become a bit of concern now. He did survive his most recent fight against Perrello, but it was not a particularly good look, and I feel that the wear and tear is really starting to get to Price at this point. Because, he has been finished a number of times in his career and has actually taken a ton of damage so far. And, he'll be going up against Oliveira, who at one point was also a pretty potent finisher, but as of late has had some pretty disappointing performances. But, stylistically, Oliveira, he is a pretty well-rounded fighter, a pretty heavy hitter on the feet. He's got some really nasty body and leg kicks. However, his output can be a bit low, and he is someone who does load up quite a bit on his shots. But Oliveira, he can grapple as well. He's really strong in the clinch. He's got a good submission game. But, the big issue is his cardio is definitely questionable, and that leads him to having just very inconsistent performances. Some days he'll just look like an absolute world beater, but on some days he'll just look super lethargic in there. And I guess that's what makes this fight kind of interesting and kind of hard to get a good read on. I think both guys are on a bit of a decline. It's kind of weird to say that because they're both, I think, still relatively young, like in their early 30s. But, both have been in the UFC for quite a while, and both have taken a ton of damage. So, I think both guys are regressing a bit. And the fact that Oliveira is so inconsistent makes this, I think, even harder to get a good read on. However, assuming both guys come in decent shape here, I am going to have to side with Oliveira. I just think that Oliveira is the more well-rounded fighter. I think that his style is somewhat well-suited to match the pace and the pressure of Price. Like, on the feet, I do think that Oliveira can keep it competitive, but obviously I don't think he'll want to stand and strike with Price for too long. I think if that happens, Price can definitely overwhelm Oliveira, but I do expect Oliveira to make this a grindy, dirty sort of fight. I think if Oliveira is able to get some of his clinch work going, it could definitely neutralize some of the volume and some of the power that is coming his way from Price here. Obviously, though, if Oliveira starts to tire out or if he starts to gas, I can definitely see Price start to pick it up later in the fight and start to maybe just overwhelm Oliveira. So Oliveira is really going to have to balance the striking and the grappling so that he doesn't just completely gas out. And I think if he's able to do that, I think he'll have a decent amount of success. And I think that he might be able to pull off a sneaky decision here. Keep it competitive on the feet, look to tie up near the end of the rounds, get a bit of control time, and just look to secure rounds that way. I think if he does that, he could probably eke out a decision here. But, I wouldn't be completely surprised if Price just drops Oliveira here. Oliveira has shown pretty good durability throughout his career, but I feel that is starting to go a little bit. So if he's not careful here, Price can definitely find the chin of Oliveira. But ultimately, I am going to side with Oliveira here. I think he's going to be able to do enough to eke out a decision. And moving right along, we have Alejandro Perez versus Johnny Eduardo. And Perez is the minus 230 favorite. Come back on Eduardo is plus 195. And I guess we'll start with the underdog in Eduardo here first. So Eduardo, he's got that Muay Thai base. In case you didn't catch that ugly-ass Muay Thai tattoo on his stomach. He does seem to have a bit of power, but obviously the volume can be a bit low. Cardio is definitely a concern for him, especially at this stage in his career. And I feel like the cardio and his output really go hand in hand. The reason he doesn't throw all that much is because he just doesn't have the cardio to be able to sustain that sort of output. And we kind of saw that on display in Eduardo's most recent fight against Nathaniel Wood, where he actually had Wood hurt early in the fight, but just never really followed up. I mean, he just never flurried him. I think had he just swarmed Wood at that moment, he probably could have gotten a finish, but I think he knew that if he had swarmed Wood and not gotten him out of there, he probably would have just gassed out and gotten finished, but it didn't look like it really mattered because he still gassed out anyways and ended up getting finished in the second round. And in the fight before that, it looked like he kind of overcommitted on a heel hook and ended up just getting knocked out in that fight as well. So I think the fight IQ of Eduardo is a bit questionable. On top of the fact that he's got pretty bad cardio, I think this guy is an absolute stay away in terms of betting. But he'll be going up against Alejandro Perez, who is primarily a striker as well, and is someone who is coming off a decent-sized layoff as well. So, Eduardo is coming off of like a 3.5-year layoff, and Perez, I believe, is coming off like a 2.5-year layoff. And, whereas for Eduardo, I don't think it's a great thing, because Eduardo is pretty old. He's like 41. Perez, I think, is in a better situation since, he is coming off a pretty nasty knockout KO by Song Yadong in 2019. So I think the 2.5-year layoff is probably good for him to recover a bit from that, as well as, really make some improvements since Perez is still relatively young in his career. I mean, he's 32, so, this should be when he's in his prime, but, I think that the layoff probably won't be affecting him as much as it is Eduardo. However, I'm not impressed at all from what I've seen with Perez. His striking is honestly pretty mediocre. It's nothing special. I don't think he's got phenomenal power or anything. He's not even someone who will move forward and throw volume. He generally is someone who will just skirt on the outside. Lots of movement, lots of feints from him, but not too much volume and not too much power. And as much as I'd like to fade Eduardo, I just don't think that Perez is the guy. I actually think Perez will probably give Eduardo the fight he wants, and that's going to be a pretty low output striking match. So, I am going to pick Perez solely on the basis of Perez being the younger fighter, being the fighter that's maybe making some improvements, being the fighter that's still in his prime. But I have zero confidence in him to get this win. The guy has looked absolutely unimpressive in the octagon. And with Eduardo, I know at least he's got some power, even if he doesn't have the volume anymore, even though his cardio isn't great anymore. I do think he's got a little bit of an equalizer in his hands. Whereas with Perez, I just think he's, just mediocre. However, Eduardo being 41 years old coming off such a long layoff is extremely, extremely concerning for me. He could be completely washed, honestly. Like, Perez could just come in here and starch him. I wouldn't be surprised if that happened. I wouldn't be surprised if this was a super low output, sort of fight for 3 rounds. This is a complete stay away fight from me, honestly. Neither guys are that impressive, and both guys coming off pretty long layoffs, a lot of variables in this fight. So, I'm going to pass on this fight. I'd love to fade Eduardo someday, but I just don't think Perez is the guy. But I am going to go with Perez. I think he wins pretty close decision here, I think. So, I'll go with Perez. Moving right along, we have Jamie Mullarkey versus Devonte Smith. And Smith is the minus 170 favorite. Comeback on Mullarkey is plus 145. And I guess we'll start with the underdog in Mullarkey here. So, Mullarkey is primarily a grappler, but, from what I have seen, he's had very marginal success with it at the UFC level. Mainly on the regional scene has he had a lot of success there because, at the UFC level, obviously he's gone up against the likes of Riddell, who did a pretty good job of stuffing most of the takedowns and pretty much just beating Mullarkey up on the feet. And then with Fares Ziam, Mullarkey was able to get a few takedowns, but wasn't able to secure a lot of control time or do too much with the takedowns. Kind of resorted to just wall install and such. And then he basically goes on to just starch Kama Worthy, so didn't really have to go with the wrestling there at all. But, with Mullarkey, I just feel that, while he's got serviceable striking, I do think that he does his best work when he gets his grappling going, but I just don't think he's that great of a grappler either. I don't know. I just think that Mullarkey's kind of one of these guys who's looking to just make a fight dirty and just look to grind out, a decision most of the time. He's just one of these fighters who, is pretty tough, has decent cardio, so, that'll get you pretty far in the UFC, but, I just don't think he really is going to win resoundingly unless it's against Kama Worthy or something. Anyways, he'll be going up against Devonte Smith, who is, I feel, a pretty legit prospect, or at least one who shows a lot of promise. Smith, very explosive fighter, basically all finishes, actually. All of his wins are by finish, so very impressive there. He moves well on the feet, does a good job of feinting, does a good job pumping out the jab as well. Will occasionally mix in the kicks also, but I think most importantly, this guy's got lightning quick hands, a very quick 1-2, and yeah, his hand speed is honestly pretty ridiculous. Honestly, not too many bad things to say about Smith, but I guess with these guys who are finishing all their fights, you're always going to have the concern of how they're going to look when they do get extended. I know Smith has got a number of round 2, even a round 4 finish, sprinkled in there, but, how is he going to look at the UFC level when he gets extended? How's his cardio going to look? That's always going to be a concern with these guys who haven't really gone to a decision. But on the feet here, I think it's Smith by a mile. Smith, I think, has got superior hand speed. He's the much crisper striker. He's much quicker in there. His footwork is much better, and obviously I do think he's got a lot of finishing upside on the feet. But, I do expect Mullarkey to look to grapple here. And even though Mullarkey has shown that he is someone who is willing to strike, someone who is willing to, use his striking to set up his takedowns, I think the smart thing to do is to look to get the fight to the ground. And I haven't seen too much from Smith's defensive grappling, so I feel that is a bit of a question mark, but on the feet, I do give a pretty significant advantage to Smith. And, I think Mullarkey might have a bit of trouble closing the distance on Smith. I think the footwork and the movement and the power of Smith may prevent Mullarkey from shooting effectively. So, I am going to pick Smith to win. I think that there's a good chance Smith gets the knockout here. I am a little hesitant to lay the chalk here, especially since I haven't seen much from the defensive grappling of Smith. There's a good chance Smith just comes out here, starches Mullarkey, and looks like a minus 300 favorite, but I'm not sure how he's going to look if Mullarkey is somehow able to get his hands on him. And, if Mullarkey is able to kind of just grind him out for a round, if he's going to have that power to put Mullarkey out come the second and third round. But, on the flip side of things, if Smith does have decent takedown defense, Mullarkey might just have to resort to, his usual wall install technique. And then, anytime Devonte Smith breaks away, he could just be piecing up Mullarkey on the feet and can win a pretty sound decision that way. So, this fight is a little volatile in my opinion, but I am going to side with Smith. I think that, there's a very clear advantage for him on the feet. And, until he's shown that he doesn't have any defensive grappling, I'm going to assume it's somewhat serviceable to the point that, he'll be able to keep this fight standing long enough to either knock Mullarkey out or just or win a pretty dominant decision. So the pick for me is Smith. I'm not sure how he could get it done just yet, but I am leaning towards knockout. The guy's got pretty crazy power, and I'm going to say he keeps his knockout streak going. So give me Smith by knockout here. And that'll take us to our next fight, Douglas Silva de Andrade versus Gaetano Pirrello. And Andrade is the minus 235 favorite, and Pirrello is going to be the plus 200 underdog. I guess we'll start with the underdog here first in Pirrello. So Pirrello is primarily a Muay Thai fighter. He's got some pretty nasty elbows and knees in the clinch. It's got some pretty heavy hands as well. Does look like he loads up quite a bit on his strikes. And, from what I've seen, I'm not really sure if this is true or not. It does seem like he is a little slow, and it is a little hard to see, in some of the footage, but it might just be because he's winding up so much on some of his shots, but I feel his hand speed might not be that great. Anyways, it does look like he has a decent tie clinch, though, and at least on the regional scene, it seems like he seems to have a bit of power. But outside of that, I feel like Pirrello's got a lot of holes in his game. For one, I don't think his cardio is all that good, and two, he seems to have not much of a ground game. So the guy's a bit one-dimensional. Not a lot to like. I mean, this guy, I don't really think should be in the UFC. He made a short notice. He made his debut on short notice against Ricky Simon. So I guess they're just giving him a couple other fights. Because he came in short notice that one time. So yeah, I think he's just going to fight out his contract. But he'll be going up against Andrade, who is a pretty heavy-handed striker as well. The guy's absolutely shredded in there. He likes to pressure his opponents. Very heavy hands, but, he is a bit plotty. His footwork isn't particularly great, and, he's a bit hittable himself. And he has shown some good toughness in there, but all that's really saying is he's taken a lot of damage. And like Pirrello, Andrade does seem to have suspect cardio as well. Usually the guys suck and win pretty hard after the first round, but it might be a little better than Pirrello's, as he has fought through the exhaustion pretty well from what I've seen. And I guess the other concern with Andrade is the age. And, at 36, with how inactive he is, that is a little concerning coming into this fight. However, the level of competition clearly goes to Andrade here. I mean, he's fought with some pretty big names in the division. Obviously he's fought the Ghost of Barao, but he's also gone up against Chito Vera, Pirrello, Rob Font, and most recently Lerone Murphy. So he's actually been up against some pretty decent prospects in there. Lost to most of them, but he's definitely been tested in there. Pirrello, on the other hand, has fought just largely bums, but on paper I feel both guys bring a lot of the same stuff to the table. The only big difference between the two is that Andrade has a lot more experience, and he's definitely fought the tougher opponents. However, stylistically, I think that it's a pretty competitive fight. I think both guys are pretty strong offensive strikers. Both guys will look to throw down. Both guys have a lot of power. So all things considered, I feel this should be a pretty competitive matchup stylistically. But, as far as the pure pick goes, I am going to side with Andrade here. I do think the experience advantage is going to play a bit of a factor here. However, I feel that the line is actually a little bit wide. I know Andrade has been in there with, some really good fighters, but, he also got destroyed by them as well. So, I mean, what do we really know about him, right? I know he's got a win over Vera, but that was a really weird fight. Vera started really slow that fight and basically just let Andrade walk him down for 2 rounds. And in the 3rd round, when Vera finally started to pick it up, he was having a lot of success against Andrade. So I think that was a fight where if Vera had just pressured early, he probably would have just 30-27 Andrade pretty easily. So yeah, I do have a half unit play on Pirrello, and I could be completely wrong about this take. Andrade could just be the far superior striker, even at this age, even with all those layoffs. Maybe he's just still a bit sharper than Pirrello, but I feel that stylistically this should be a pretty close fight. I think both guys are probably going to throw down in there. And, if that happens, I'm going to side with the guy who's a little bit younger, maybe a little more durable. And while I did say I think that Pirrello might be a little slower in there, I think that Andrade, he's not particularly quick in there either, so I think that when they're swinging leather in there and they're exchanging in the pocket, it could be a very 50-50 sort of fight. And I think someone's going to get dropped. So if that happens, I'm going to take the guy who's a plus 200 underdog here. And I get it here. I mean, this could look like a very bad bet in hindsight. I'm taking a guy who's arguably not UFC caliber in Pirrello, but I think that Andrade is going to give Pirrello the fight that he wants, and that's all I'm really asking for, when I'm holding a plus 200 ticket here on Pirrello. So the official pick for me is Andrade, but I do have a half unit bet on Pirrello, and I really recommend not betting Andrade here. I don't think you should be this big of a favorite. Andrade, I don't think is that good of a fighter, even though Pirrello's probably not UFC caliber. I wouldn't lay the chalk on Andrade in this spot. So the pick is Andrade, but don't bet him, guys. And in the next fight, we have Bethe Correia versus Karol Rosa, and I guess we'll start with Correia first. So Correia, arguably just one of the least athletic fighters in the division. Super awkward striking. Kind of just plods around in there and is honestly pretty slow. And the fact that she had a semi-competitive striking match with Aldana kind of blows my mind. But, that is kind of the style that she has, where she likes to move forward and be in your face. And, she's really willing to throw down in there. She'll take a ton of damage, but, she'll definitely be getting off on some of her strikes as well. And generally, fighting at women's flyweight, you're not fighting a lot of other fighters who have a ton of power, or other fighters who are super technical in there, so they're not able to really fully take advantage. So Bethe is usually able to just move forward and keep a fight relatively close, even if she is getting touched up, because she'll always look to throw volume as well. And moving along to her opponent, Karol Rosa, she's a pretty well-rounded fighter in my opinion, someone who will put out volume as well, can definitely mix in the grappling also. She seems like a pretty decent prospect. The only issue I guess I have with her is she is a bit hittable, and she's still a little unproven. So while she has kind of looked good so far in the UFC, they're against what I believe are pretty low-level opponents. Her best win might probably be against Lara Procopio, who was still able to land like 100+ significant strikes on Rosa. So, take that for what you will. And for what it's worth, Procopio has actually been cut, even though I think it is a bit unwarranted. I honestly don't know why the UFC did that. Procopio seemed like a decent prospect. I know she's 1-2, but she's had, I think, pretty stiff competition, if I'm being honest. But going back to Rosa here, her other wins aren't all that impressive. Vanessa Mello, very, very low-level fighter. And Jocelyn Edwards, who I believe was coming in short notice and is someone who doesn't really have much defensive grappling, and Rosa was able to fully take advantage of that. So Rosa's really only beaten, very low-level fighters, probably fighters that aren't really UFC caliber. That said, though, I think I am still going to pick her to win. She is going to be the significantly younger fighter. Definitely the more athletic fighter. Not that it's saying much, since, it is Bethe we're talking about here. However, what's really keeping me from just hammering this line is obviously because I do feel it is a little wide, and that Rosa is a bit unproven. But what gives me a bit of hesitancy with this fight is that, like I said before, Rosa is a bit hittable, and Bethe is someone who can definitely make a fight really dirty. And with how hittable Rosa is, I expect Bethe to be able to land a few of her shots of her own. And if a grappler in Procopio is able to land 100+ significant strikes on Rosa, I think that someone like Correia, who's been in there with some of the best fighters, even though Bethe isn't the most athletic, the most technically sound fighter in there, she is able to get off on a lot of her strikes. She is able to throw a lot of volume. And, I just got a weird feeling this could be one of those fights where it's really back and forth, very sloppy fight, honestly. And generally, while I do think that Rosa is going to be the one coming out ahead, I don't think that she'll completely run away with it. I could be wrong here. I mean, Bethe is getting a bit older, so there's a chance that Rosa just completely destroys her on the feet, but I don't think that's too likely. I think it should be somewhat competitive, and you just never know what's judging these days. If it's a very back and forth sort of fight, it could be anyone's. The pick obviously is still going to be Rosa for me, but I don't think I'll be betting Rosa at this wide of odds. I do think that Rosa's going to have to prove herself a little more at the UFC level before justifying being such a massive favorite. So pick for me is Rosa. I'll have her winning by decision here. And moving right along, we have Jared Gordon versus Joe Solecki. And Solecki's the minus 145 favorite, and comeback on Gordon is plus 125. And let's start with Solecki first. So Solecki is primarily a grappler. I don't think his striking is terrible or anything, but I just don't think he has really all that much to offer on the feet. However, he is still a pretty young guy, and he's at that age where he could likely be making a lot of improvements as he's accumulating experience here. But like I said before, he is primarily a grappler. Generally, he will look to close the distance, get the fight to the ground, and will look to find the finish if it presents itself. But it does appear he's okay with just grinding opponents out on the ground if the submission or the finish doesn't materialize. All in all, I feel that Solecki's a decent prospect with the tools to at least be a mid-level fighter here. I think that if he polished up his striking a little bit and maybe showed a little more urgency on the ground, he could be very good. He could be a top 10, top 15 sort of guy. But as of right now, I do think that he still has a lot of improvements to make, and I do think he's got some upside. But as of right now, I do think he's still got a little way to go. And as for his opponent, Jared Gordon, I think we've more or less seen a completed product. Gordon is a pretty well-rounded fighter. I think his striking is probably a little more polished than Solecki. He definitely seems a little more comfortable there, but I do consider Gordon a bit more of a grappler, as he generally will look to get his grappling going. And, he is someone who is okay with just smothering his opponents, laying on top of him, and kind of just accruing control time as well. I think that Gordon is a little more aggressive with his ground and pound on top, but, I think that Solecki's probably the better submission grappler. And, this is actually a really interesting fight. It is a little tough to call. We have a grappler versus grappler, essentially, and I feel that whoever's the one initiating the grappling will probably have more success, will probably be the one who wins. Both guys, while they are grapplers, do sometimes maybe drag the fight out a little longer on the feet than it should. Take, for example, Solecki in his most recent fight against Miller. He was very content to stand and strike with Miller, and it was a very even fight, at least on the feet. And then Miller was actually able to steal that first round because he initiated the takedown against Solecki. And, fortunately for Solecki, that fight, Miller doesn't have a gas tank at that stage in his career, and Solecki was able to pretty much take over in the second and third round. And even in the Austin Hubbard fight, Solecki was content to strike with Hubbard for most of that first round until eventually he was able to backpack Hubbard and eventually find the finish there. So, not gonna criticize him too much, but in this fight, if he's on the feet too long with Gordon and Gordon ends up shooting a takedown on Solecki could be in a bit of trouble. I don't think that Gordon's a crazy finisher or anything on top, but Solecki has shown that he is content with attacking submissions off the bottom, and that can be pretty bad. You could easily drop around doing that. So I think that if Solecki isn't urgent with his grappling, he could leave openings for Gordon to get his grappling going. And the same can be said for Gordon. If if he's not aggressive with his grappling, it could leave openings for Solecki to shoot the takedown and work his grappling from there. So I guess it really comes down to who's going to be the one taking initiative. On the feet, I might favor Gordon a little bit more. I think that he definitely seems a little more fluid there and definitely a little more comfortable. But, I don't think he's going to be running away with the striking. So on the feet, it might be pretty even with maybe a slight lean towards Gordon. So, again, whoever does initiate the grappling, I think will generally be the one having more success. As for who I think will have a bit more success there, I am going to have to side with Solecki. I think overall he's the better grappler, whereas with Gordon, I think he might be a better wrestler. But more importantly, I do think that Solecki's going to be the bigger, stronger guy in there. And I'm not saying Gordon is small or anything, but I do feel that Gordon could make 145 if he really dedicated himself there. I know he's tried and failed a couple times, but I don't think it's an issue of his size. I think it's more so of him trying to cut an extra 10 pounds during fight week, as opposed to him looking to maybe just cut a bit of weight overall, cut down some of his walk around weight, which I think he could do. I mean, I don't think the guy's like all that muscular. He's a little soft, if I'm being honest, compared to someone like Solecki. Solecki's, I think, much more toned. I think he's definitely got a bit more muscle mass. So I think that, when it comes to the grappling, I do have to favor Solecki a little bit more, just because, I think Solecki's, probably the more well-rounded grappler and going to be the stronger guy in this situation. And obviously that is a bit of speculation. I'm not 100% sure on this thing, but just from what I've seen, Solecki definitely looks like the stronger guy. And so I'm going to have to side with Solecki here. I know Gordon's fought the higher level of opponents. He's been in the UFC a little bit longer, but I do think that Solecki's got a lot more upside here. So I'm going to go with Solecki to win via decision here. And this will bring us to our next fight. Misha Cirkunov versus Krzysztof Jotko, and Jotko's going to be the minus 167 favorite. Come back on. Cirkunov is plus 147, and Cirkunov is actually going to be moving down to 185 this fight. He usually does fight at light heavyweight, but he'll be moving down to 185 this fight. So Cirkunov is a beast of a grappler, and on the feet he does have a bit of power, but I do feel his striking is a bit limited. Usually he will look to level change and really just get his grappling going. And once he gets the fight to the ground, he is very aggressive with hunting the submissions. He will generally look to advance positions really quickly and then look to snap up a submission. And Cirkunov, he is actually a pretty tricky submission artist, and he is very strong in there as well. So a lot of the time he can just kind of muscle his way to a sub. And a ton of his fights have actually finished relatively early, mostly in the first round. There are some fights that have gone into the second or third round that, he is able to find the finish in. But, it's been since I think 9 or 10 years since he's last seen a decision. Yeah, I'm looking at his record right now, and it does look like it was back in 2011 was his last decision, last fight that went to a decision. So, yeah, this guy is very much kill or be killed. And fortunately for him, Jotko is not really a killer. So Jotko, the guy is a big-time decisionator in my opinion. He's pretty light on the feet. He's got good lateral movement. He's good at throwing the low leg kick, the jab. Will occasionally mix in the takedown, but generally he will look to keep the fight standing. And on the feet, I don't think he's got a ton of power or anything. Usually he's just he's just decisionating guys. He's just kind of pitter-pattering them and just working them to a decision. And, the thing with Jotko is I don't think he's beaten a ton of good fighters. He's gotten by with just beating a bunch of, mid, low-level guys. Flipping through his record, I don't think any of his wins really jump out to me. I don't think he's had a really impressive win either. Most of the wins that he does win are just fights where, he's kind of just doing just enough to win a decision here. But what I was really looking for Jotko was just how he performed against grapplers, and there isn't a ton of footage of Jotko up against grapplers. I think the only fight that was against a grappler was David Branch, where Branch did actually have a bit of success early with the grappling, but it looked like Branch might have faded after that and had very minimal success with the grappling afterwards. But outside of that, I haven't really seen much from Jotko. It does look like he has one submission loss on his record, but outside of that, hasn't really been subbed by anyone else. So this is a pretty interesting matchup, somewhat straightforward in my opinion. Cirkunov is basically he's just going to sub you or he's going to get knocked out. That's kind of how it's played out the past 10 years with him. Now, the issue that we kind of run into here is Jotko's only been submitted once and has generally shown, decent defensive grappling. But Jotko also isn't really a finisher, so something's got to give here. And I'm definitely leaning on the side of Cirkunov here. Jotko hasn't really faced anyone with the grappling near the level of Cirkunov's. And, Cirkunov coming down from 205, I think is going to have a massive strength and power advantage over Jotko. Honestly, Cirkunov at plus odds is a little surprising to me. I don't think that Jotko should be this big of a favorite. I think, this fight should at worst be a pick'em. Maybe even favor Cirkunov. I don't know if I'm missing anything here, but Jotko being at minus 170 is a goddamn joke, honestly. I do favor Jotko on the feet, but I don't think that Cirkunov is going to look to stand with Jotko. I'm pretty sure Cirkunov is going to look to grapple this fight. He's coming off of a pretty nasty knockout, so I think Cirkunov's not gonna fuck around on the feet too much. He's probably just gonna go to his bread and butter, look for that submission early, and I think there's a good chance he finds it. Like, I am honestly perplexed that this line is lined this way. I don't know if people think that maybe Cirkunov is shot or something. He has been finished in 4 of his last 6 fights, but again, Jotko not really a finisher, and I guess maybe the cut down to 185 might be too much for Cirkunov, but I feel the size advantage and the strength advantage of him cutting down to 185 is going to be a little more beneficial. It might outweigh the downsides of the cut, and if he is able to get his hands on Jotko, I have a pretty strong feeling he is going to get the sub. So the pick here is obviously going to be Cirkunov for me, and I think he gets it done in the first round. I think he gets that first round submission. I think there's a pretty good chance that Cirkunov is going to be able to just bully Jotko early with the grappling. Let me know what you guys think about this. Let me know if I'm missing any crucial information, like if Cirkunov's dealing with some fucking health issues or something. But, if he's not, I do think that Cirkunov should honestly run through Jotko. So yeah, I got Cirkunov winning. I have him winning by submission. Moving along, we have Cal Daukaus versus Kevin Holland, and Holland's going to be the -150 favorite. Come back on Daukaus is +130. So yeah, pretty interesting fight here. Daukaus, honestly, a bit of a disappointment so far. I mean, I was kind of high on the guy. I feel like he's got the skills, honestly, to succeed, but hasn't really been able to put it all together. Like, on the feet, I feel he's got pretty crisp boxing. Would like to see him go to it more, but I think for this matchup, he'll probably have to go to his grappling a little bit. I think Daukaus has got pretty good clinch work. His wrestling isn't particularly great, but, if he is able to get the fight to the ground, he is, I think, pretty competent there. He's got pretty solid jiu-jitsu, and he's got pretty good scrambling ability as well. So yeah, overall, I do feel he's a pretty well-rounded fighter who just has been struggling to put it all together, honestly. And he's been fighting, I think, pretty tough opponents, because he made his UFC debut against Brendan Allen and actually put up a pretty damn good fight. Then beat Stoltzfus, I'd say, pretty comfortably. And then in his fight against Phil Hawes, I think he definitely looked a lot worse than I had expected him to come in looking. Obviously, I think I did bet him that fight. But yeah, that was a really weird fight, because it looked like Daukaus might have kind of gassed after that first round, which was really unexpected, right? Out of all people, I think that Hawes would have been the one to gas in that fight. But, that was weird, because I do believe Daukaus had actually gotten COVID prior to that fight. And while he was, I think, asymptomatic, I think it definitely might have affected him going into this fight, because he was uncharacteristically slow this fight, I guess. And he hasn't really slowed down as much in fights, or at least in previous fights, as he had in this fight. So really weird here, but I do think he might have recovered a bit from it, so I don't think it'll be too big of a concern going into this fight. And he'll be going up against Kevin Holland, who he's a fantastic striker. He's got pinpoint accuracy. He's got a wide variety of strikes in there as well. Jiu-jitsu is solid on Holland's part, but the big issue obviously is going to be the fact that this guy has got pretty terrible takedown defense and is way too comfortable, attacking submissions off his back. Has shown very little urgency to get up off his back as well. So for that reason, it's going to be really hard for me to pick Kevin Holland here, even though I do feel he's probably the better striker in this situation. But man, they'll actually size up pretty well in this fight. Both guys are 6'3", very lanky guys for the division, which makes me a little hesitant picking Daukaus as well, because, Daukaus isn't a fantastic wrestler or anything. And unlike some of Holland's previous opponents, Brunson and Vettori, who are, much stockier guys, I just have a hard time seeing Daukaus being able to really, control Holland on the ground like these guys have. But then again, Holland just showed very little resistance when he was on his back. And if if Daukaus is able to somehow get Holland to the ground, that might be it for Holland for the round. So yeah, really, really tough and interesting fight to call here, but I guess I'm going to have to still side with Daukaus. I'm not sure if I'm going to go back to the well with him. I'd like to see him actually just get a few more fights under his belt before I feel confident about picking him or betting him again. But ultimately, I do feel there's still a path to victory for him, and I'll have to see whether or not Holland has improved his takedown defense, has improved his get-up game before I bet on him either. So I think this is a big prove-it spot for both fighters. Not one I'm rushing to bet on either side, but if I had to bet a side, and if I had to pick a side, I am going to go with Daukaus. I think that the game plan obviously should be to take Holland down. You don't want to be striking with him for too long. Holland is a pretty dangerous striker, and Holland's actually shown some pretty questionable cardio himself. So if Daukaus didn't just get completely fucked by COVID and his lungs are okay, I do think that Daukaus should be able to grind himself to a victory here. So I'm going to go with Daukaus, and I might actually take Daukaus to win by submission in the third round here. So give me Daukaus. And in the co-main event, we have Aspen Ladd versus Macy Chiasson, and Ladd is the minus 200 favorite. Comeback on Chiasson is plus 170. So with Ladd, I don't think she's got very much striking. I don't think it's that good at all. She likes to wing power shots to close the distance. Wrestling seems solid, has a nice body lock takedown. Once she is able to get the fight to the ground, she is pretty heavy on top. We'll look for submissions, throw up ground and pound as well. But, I have seen her overextend before in certain situations and have been reversed, I think particularly in that Kunitskaya fight. But it does look like she sometimes has a habit of getting a little over-aggressive with her ground and pound and just losing position. That's definitely a bit of a concern, in my opinion. And her striking did get exposed a bit against Germaine Durandamy, who was able to land a beautiful right cross on her, knocked her out in the first, I think, 20 seconds or so. With that said, though, GDR is, I think, by far the best striker in the division. And even though Chiasson is built similarly and probably has a similar skill set, I don't think she's going to be quite on that level, and I'm not sure she's got what it takes to really take advantage of that like GDR did. But stylistically, this does feel like a similar matchup, but obviously at a much lower level for Ladd. But with Chiasson, her striking is solid. She uses her length pretty well, is pretty aggressive on the feet. However, it looks like she's kind of paced herself a little bit better recently. She used to come out like guns blazing, but it looks like in her most recent fight, she was able to slow it down a little bit. Have seen her kind of overextend a bit with her aggression, which I think can make it kind of easy for Ladd to get the timing down and just shoot for a double or just go for the level change. And off her back, Chiasson just does not look that good. Fighters like Renault and Landsberg was able to have some success against her on the ground, which, isn't really a good look considering Renault is 44 and is on a pretty steep decline, and also not a very good look considering Landsberg is primarily a striker as well. So just having a striker give you that much trouble on the ground is, it's a pretty bad look. So for that reason, I do have to slightly lean Ladd here just seeing how much Chiasson struggled on the ground. I think that if Ladd is able to get her on the ground, she'll be pretty dominant there. She'll probably be able to land some pretty nasty ground and pound, possibly even get the submission. I'd say the only concern here is that Ladd's striking is, pretty bad. And if she isn't able to set up her takedowns well, she'll struggle getting in distance. She'll struggle getting Chiasson to the ground. But like I said before, Chiasson has shown to kind of overextend on some of her combinations, and Ladd could definitely shoot like a reactive takedown off of that. However, if Chiasson fights smart, fights measured, just stays on the outside, just work the kicks, work the jab, I think she could have a lot of success against Ladd on the feet. So for that reason, I do feel that Chiasson is probably the value side here, especially at plus 170. I just don't know if I could really trust her to do that. And with how bad Chiasson has looked on the ground, if Ladd is able to get her to the ground at any point, that could be it for the fight. So for that reason, I'm just not too keen on playing Chiasson at even plus 170. So as far as the pick goes, I am just going to have to side with Ladd here. I think that over the course of 15 minutes, she can land at least 2 takedowns, really look to either, get the ground and pound or submission finish, or maybe just, ride out the round on top. But minus 200 definitely does feel a bit steep, especially for someone like Ladd who has shown some striking deficiencies. So yeah, the pick here is Ladd, but I'm not looking to bet this fight at all. I think that both fighters just have too big of holes in their games for me to want to put money on them. And in the main event, we have Johnny Walker versus Thiago Santos, and Santos is the minus 172 favorite. Comeback on Walker is plus 147, and we'll start with the underdog in Johnny Walker. So the guy is the definition of a glass cannon. I mean, talk about someone who lives and dies by the knockout. He's got a super fan-friendly style. He's going to move forward, but he's also going to leave a ton of openings. He's got a lot of power, but his chin is also made of glass. So that's just the perfect recipe for an exciting fight, in my opinion. But on the feet, Walker, he's actually got pretty decent feints. He's going to give opponents multiple looks and then just look to blitz in and land some wild shots. But yeah, Walker's got some big power. He's very explosive. And, that being said, though, I do feel a lot of his moves, a lot of his knockouts are from pretty low percentage moves. For example, he's going to be throwing a lot of like spinning shit and, jump knees and stuff. And, if I'm being honest, I just don't know how sustainable that is. Like, how many hook kicks and elbows and back fists is this guy going to be able to land? Like, if it happens once or twice, you could say it might be a fluke, but he's been able to pull it off in multiple fights pretty consistently. So on one hand, I'm questioning the sustainability of it, but on the other hand, he's shown a pretty consistent pattern here. But one thing is for sure, if he isn't able to pull off some of these crazy techniques, he does leave a ton of openings for his opponents to get the finish. And he'll be in a pretty precarious spot here against Santos, who is a very nasty hitter himself, someone who is a bona fide finisher. I mean, Santos does have 11 of his 13 wins by KO in the UFC, so the guy's got a ton of finishing upside. And if Walker's not careful here, he can see himself staring up at the lights here. And with how questionable the chin of Walker is, if Santos is able to land clean, I don't doubt that Santos could put Walker out. But the big concern here is the decline that Santos is on. I mean, after blowing out both of his knees, I think that he's shown a pretty steep decline, honestly. Like, the power is still definitely there. He still showed some power against Teixeira, but at this point, who hasn't? And Teixeira was still actually able to take some of the best shots from Santos and was able to turn it around on Santos after Santos had completely blown his load on Teixeira early. And then in his fight against Rakic for Santos, he definitely looked a bit more tentative in there. And, I think worst of all was that Santos just looked significantly slower in there. It seemed like Rakic saw a lot of the heavier shots coming, and Santos just did not look quite that good. And, coming off blowing out both of his knees, I think he's going to be a little hesitant to throw some of those vicious leg kicks that he's known for. And if he has continued to regress, I think he's going to be in a pretty tough spot here against Walker, who is a pretty potent finisher himself. But, overall, I do feel this is a pretty tough fight to call just because Walker is so unpredictable. Like I said before, we can't expect Walker to move forward and throw some wild stuff in there. But the guy's defense is pretty much non-existent. His durability is almost non-existent. But ultimately, I do still feel this is a pretty 50-50 fight. Both guys are super dangerous. Both guys have a lot of power. But when it comes down to it, I think I might have to lean towards the fighter who's a little younger, who's a little quicker, who might be a little more explosive and a little closer to his prime in Walker here. Like, I completely understand and am aware that Walker can just get flatlined here. It's happened before, but I don't think it can be denied that Walker's got a lot of finishing upside on his end as well. So yeah, at the end of the day, I feel this is a pretty 50-50 fight. And, seeing how Santos has looked in his most recent fights, I just don't think he should be this big of a favorite. So yeah, I've already put a unit on Walker. I know this could completely blow up in my face. I think the safer play might just be the under or fight ends in KO, because the way Walker fights, I think, just invites a brawl. And he's just asking for someone to get finished, whether it's him or his opponent. So yeah, not like a crazy in-depth breakdown here. I think it's honestly pretty straightforward. I think someone's going to get flatlined here. So that might just be the play. But for me, I'm just going to side with Walker because I do feel he's going to be the more athletic fighter and the fighter closer to his prime at this point, even though he does have some chin issues. And it's not like Santos has never been finished here either. So, if he's eating some of these shots from Walker, I do see Santos potentially going out as well. So give me Walker here, and give me Walker by round 1 knockout.